Hi, folks. Welcome to a thrilling new episode of the Medical Device Cybersecurity Podcast. I'm here joined with Tibor Zechmeister, who's a hard person to describe. He's done so many things in the past, and he's still doing so many things today around medical devices. So I'll tell you a bit more about how I got to know him. So if you don't know Tibor, he's quite active on LinkedIn, where he shares some awesome content on medical devices, and sometimes the occasional oddly relatable meme around the industry. So it's great to see someone who has humor and is able to share a lot of knowledge. Tibor, welcome to the Medical Device Cybersecurity Podcast.
Thank you so much, Mathieu, for having me. I'm really excited to have this collaboration project today because I think one of the most interesting compilations you can have is cybersecurity and risk management, especially with medical devices.
Ooh.
So I'm still looking forward to today's episode.
I think it's going to be an awesome conversation. So the reason why I wanted to reach out and have this conversation in the first place is a video you posted some months back, maybe 3 months ago, around ISO 14971 and how some medical device manufacturers most medical device manufacturers were not applying correctly the idea of as low as possible approach and not necessarily understanding the difference with, let's say, something that as low as reasonably practicable. So can you give us some light around what are these concepts and why do they even matter in the first place for medical device manufacturers?
Absolutely. So I think that's quite a loaded question for the beginning, but let's deep dive into that altogether. So let's start maybe with the standard itself of ISO 14971.
Mm-hmm.
So it has different basic components around risk management. Say, for example, you need to identify your risks, you need to evaluate your risk, you need to mitigate your risks. And the interesting part is the evaluation of risks. So the general standard tells you that you as a manufacturer have the possibility to decide which risks are, I would say, acceptable or unacceptable for you. So to really take an example, if you develop a really low risk medical device where you say, okay, what could be the worst thing that could be happening? Let's say, okay, somebody gets a little bit injured, then you might probably say that if somebody is dying due to your medical device, that would be totally unacceptable. But if you say if somebody is a little bit injured, you say, okay, that's the risk of the medical device, I can live with that. But in another example, if you have a high risk medical device, like let's say an implant, for example, internal defibrillator attached to your heart or something like that, there you might say, yeah, maybe I do tolerate even death cases because maybe one person dies due to my medical device, but I can still save 99 people out of 100 altogether. So, and the manufacturer has the basic right to decide which principle they would apply this logic of what's acceptable or unacceptable altogether. And the standard even says that if you have certain risks that are acceptable based on your criteria, you don't even have to do any more mitigation. Meaning you identify certain risks, they're acceptable for you, and you say, you know what, these are low risks, I don't need to treat them anymore. I just let them exist, and this is okay. But now the European Commission is coming, and this is maybe nothing new because this was already present in the old medical device directive in the European Union. With the medical device regulation, you have in the so-called Annex 1, which is the first big annex, a clear statement saying that the requirement in this annex to reduce risks as far as possible means the reduction of risks as far as possible without adversely affecting the benefit-risk ratio. So I've now cited this annex, and what does this mean? So this practically means that no matter how small your risk or low your risk altogether is, you have to deal with it. You have to try to mitigate that. So imagine you have 500 different risks for your medical device. And even if you say this risk would be already quite low and acceptable on your terms, you still need to consider some kind of risk mitigation. And this is the so-called as low as possible principle, meaning if one risk could kill your patient and the other one simply causes some annoyance to the patient, you still have to consider mitigating and reducing both of them. And for the as low as reasonably possible approach, this is the more global and standard approach that also the standard is promoting or could be promoting altogether. It says, you know what, focus on the high impact risks and ignore or at least document and don't deal with the lower risks anymore. And as you can imagine, this is quite challenging in the European Union. Because by the standard, you might have 500 risks, 20 are really a big issue, 480 might be really just a nuisance to the patient or to the user altogether. But in the European Union, it tells you you need to try to mitigate them no matter what. And no matter the costs, no matter the effort, no matter the device, maybe the device development and research phases altogether. The only exception is, and this is what I cited before with the Annex 1 is, unless it's adversely affecting the benefit-risk ratio. So you might ask, okay, what about that? What about this exception? Let's talk about cybersecurity. Imagine you have, let's take the internal defibrillator. You have an implant. It's a defibrillator and it's wirelessly connected. So you can access it on a wireless level. I mean, that's a risk. Because if I'm a good hacker and if I'm able to control this defibrillator in a human being, I could hack the thing and I could trigger the defibrillation procedure, even though the person is not having a fibrillation, meaning I might be even able to kill somebody. So that would be a potentially lethal risk. I have good intentions. I want to make it wireless so I don't have to cut open the patient every time I need to change something in my firmware, for example. But at the same time, I've now opened the cybersecurity risk problem here. And by this exception statement, we could be saying, if we just look at the as low as possible risk, I could introduce one layer of passwords, saying I only can access the interface if I have a certain password. But now somebody could be saying, yeah, but somebody could hack the password. Then you say, you know what? I introduced 2 layers of passwords, 5 layers, 100 layers, even 500 layers or something like that. I mean, I could do that on the technical level, but now we come to this exception, who will use this medical device now? So now I have a perfectly safe medical device where it's absolutely, I mean, not impossible, but improbable that somebody will brute force them through 500 layers of highly complex passwords. But tell me one user, doctor, or anybody else who is willing to go through 500 layers of passwords to open the interface, for example, and to change something in this medical device. So this was quite a long answer, but this is the basic principle here. So we try to mitigate as far as possible, but still in a reasonable manner where we don't completely destroy the use case of the medical device, or let's say the usability or the effectiveness and the performance of the medical device.
Awesome. Wow. And folks, for those of you who are not seeing this on video, I could tell that Tibor was looking at the definition over on his left. You probably have it written somewhere on the table, right?
I even have the medical device regulation open because if we need to track something or to cite something, I have it available.
Nice.
So, no, I'm not knowing that by heart. That would be a little bit too crazy.
I know. I think there's some people out there that do. So it's some.
You know, I have some auditor colleagues who are auditing ISO 13485 quality management systems, and some of them can really cite each and every clause.
Wow.
And I'm always like, wow, okay, that's really cool.
So Tibor, that's a great transition. Awesome. What is it that you do, and what has been your experience with dealing with standards such as ISO 14971?
Absolutely. So I have quite a long journey, way long journey in medical devices. I founded my first medical device company back in 2011. It was back then a company focusing on neurological medical devices for measurement and diagnosis of neurodegenerative diseases such as Parkinson's disease, essential tremor, for example, and so on. This company had certified medical devices. We, of course, had also a quality management system and so on. So that was my first experience as a manufacturer for MDD, but also the medical device regulation about what it means to be a manufacturer in Europe altogether. And after that, after this first project, I had a few more ventures and companies within the medical device industry. Currently, I'm in my 5th project, that is Splin AI, which is a software as a service provider for regulatory automation software. So, for example, post-market surveillance, process automation, using AI tools to improve manual steps to become them more automated altogether. And which is maybe also interesting since I mentioned it, I'm also an external auditor at the notified body in Europe, meaning, I mean, you could call it, I don't know, some people call it the dark side of the medical device force, or I'm not sure how you could call it. But I'm also auditing a few companies per year. meaning that I'm really checking if they're complying with the medical device regulation, also with the quality management system requirements altogether. So for me, this is really a good combination to experience everything from a manufacturer's perspective, but also from the perspective of a notified body and of an auditor, so that you really kind of get a pragmatic approach to how to comply with everything, but at the same time not overcomplicate.
Yeah.
And maybe an interesting story regarding cybersecurity, because we will be talking about that today. I remember back during my first ever certification, it was really many years ago, when we prepared the submission for the technical documentation of one of these neurological medical devices. We back then had a Bluetooth module in it, and it had Bluetooth communication. And I really remember that one of my auditors back then said, "Did you think about cybersecurity?" And I was like, "Yeah, there's not really a harm, but we considered that in risk management. Look, we even did some validation protocols and activities checking how is it possible to access the device, what data could you read?" So that was also interesting for GDPR. And back then I remember it was like, oh, wow, yeah, that's more than sufficient, because I was just asking, and if you wouldn't have done it, I would have just given you a recommendation to consider it in the future. If you would do the same thing now in 2025 and say, yeah, I've done a little bit of cybersecurity for my medical device, I mean, that would be a major nonconformity. So probably you would get into a lot of trouble with your notified body or authority you're communicating with.
Yeah, and after all the attacks we've seen on hospitals, especially in Europe, it's been devastating. So yeah, medical devices is definitely a big topic now. So I want to talk about the auditor side. You're doing multiple audits every year. How are the manufacturers doing with regard to MDR? What would you say is their level of compliance in terms of cybersecurity at the moment?
I mean, I have to say, at the moment, it's still a full spectrum I'm seeing. So altogether, I've audited a few companies where I'm even saying, wow, that is next level what they're doing.
Wow.
So excellent risk analysis. They're focusing protocols. They're checking. They're using multiple guidelines and guidance documents by the MDCG, but also by the FDA, to really try to have a holistic approach of how to do that. Their developers know what they're doing. But I've also seen the other side of the spectrum, where people are just telling me, yeah, okay, and what happens if some device, nothing will go wrong, and even if they steal some data, yeah, whatever. So they have this, I would say, more liberal approach with that. But as we said, more devices are connected nowadays. You have more smart environments altogether, and I would maybe agree if a medical device could be hacked, but it wouldn't really cause any damage. But let's be honest, every firmware in every medical device that is measuring something or diagnosing something or even providing information for diagnosis or therapy, I mean, if I'm malicious and hack something into there, let's talk about the blood glucose monitor, for example. If I'm hacking in there and just doubling or tripling the digits that the patient is seeing, I mean, we know what's happening if you have the wrong insulin levels and the system is wrong values, and you think, okay, my level is far too high, I need to take some insulin, for example. And in the meantime, everything would be okay. I mean, that could even kill people, for example. Yeah. So nowadays, we really have to do a different consideration. And I really want to add there, personally, I'm absolutely pro smart and connected devices. I love this technology that don't have to have meters of cables altogether. Everything can be wireless. You can transmit data so fast altogether. So I'm an absolute advocate of this technological approach we are having right now and interconnected devices. But at the same time, I do believe that we need to have at least a few minimum levels of security and safety here. Yeah. That nothing could be happening with the patients.
Yeah, it's a trade-off, right? When you bring a new technology, you get all these additional benefits, but you also get these other risks. And the benefits may be very high, but if the risks are also very high, how much are you really gaining? So it's all about finding the right balance. And talking about finding the right balance, so some manufacturers are a little bit behind when it comes to cybersecurity. One of the things that they have to do to get back on course with this will be to apply the as low as reasonably practicable. So if you were a manufacturer and you're starting out a medical device, let's say you're starting out from scratch, what are the steps that you can follow to start implementing this for your medical device?
It's really a good question. So I think the first and most important thing is to really consider if, based on your intended use and the general technological approach you're choosing, cybersecurity is an issue or isn't an issue altogether. I mean, it seems obvious, but just because you have electronics in your medical device doesn't automatically mean that you have a Bluetooth module in there or you need Wi-Fi connectivity or something like that. So that first step saying, is a wireless connectivity or the possibility to have some connection and remote access to your device something you need altogether? Because, I'm talking to a lot of startups in the medical device industry, and you've probably also seen it. Everything has to be AI. Everything has to be wireless. Everything has to have a battery and so on. And I know from a technological standpoint, yes, of course, it's cool and we should integrate it because there are so many possibilities. But really the first step would be, is it really required? And is it required by my customers, by my users? Because for me as an engineer, having a wireless connectivity is absolutely logical. But I can tell you, during my first medical device developments, I went to hospitals. I talked to doctors and IT experts in the hospitals, and they said, please no remote connectivity because A, we don't have Wi-Fi in our buildings, because we have some special material in our walls that we couldn't even communicate via Wi-Fi. Wow. And the other thing is, we don't want to have Wi-Fi because it's just getting too much complexity into our general cybersecurity program. So step number one, really think about, is a wireless connectivity or any remote access or updating profile necessary for your technology? And if you say yes, and there are many devices where the answer is yes, especially if you're having mobile phone medical devices, so software, standalone software or something like that, where you say, yes, I need to have some interfacing with the physical or non-physical components, then the next logical step for me would be, please be really sure that you have at least one person in the team. You could get some external help with consultants, but you should have at least one person in your team that is fairly sophisticated in terms of cybersecurity and wireless connections. So this means that if you have a group of engineers or something like that, they don't have to be cybersecurity experts 100%. So that's why you have external help. You can work together with other experts, consultants, or any help you're getting. But these people should be at least knowing about what's encryption, what are different types of encryptions, what could be an issue in terms of a penetration test, for example. What does that mean to do a penetration test? What are certain coding standards, for example? That is a common guideline, that a set of rules and standards, how you should develop that you're having a more secure approach regarding information security, but also cybersecurity altogether. So I would really say, try to find talent or at least one person in your team who has at least medium knowledge on that level, because otherwise you're getting into trouble. And you might develop for 6 or 7 months on your device, and you simply have, after 6 or 7 months, somebody tells you, what about cybersecurity? Did you think about that? And the last step before you get into actual development, and later on, of course, after development, verification, validation, and so on, I would really recommend, that this is also today's topic, think about risks. You don't even have to do a fully sophisticated risk analysis where you have 500 risks. You will do that later on in your medical device development. But when you're starting out and before you really go into development, think about what would be the major risks that could be happening if somebody is really trying to enter your system, hack your system, modify your system, or even collect data. Because in some cases, we're not only talking about risks related to, I don't know, the measurements are manipulated or the therapy of a medical device is modified or something like that, but personal identifiable information. So this is more about data protection and the GDPR, for example, than cybersecurity. But for me, this is in one context. Because if somebody tells me, yes, my device could be hacked in theory, there could be a sniffer, for example, that is collecting data, but it's completely anonymous data, it's completely unusable to the hacker, and the hacker wouldn't be even possible to update the firmware or something like that, because that is fixed and only a sniffing activity could be happening, then I say, okay, that's a low risk. If there is no exception, we can probably tolerate that risk, have a minimum effort of cybersecurity activities. But as I said before, if I'm developing a wireless defibrillator, and somebody could hack into that and really trigger a defect altogether, I mean, that's something where the whole team should be saying, oh, we don't want to have that.
Yeah.
That's really a bad situation and we need to stop that. So these would be really the 3 steps. Question if it's really necessary. Do you want to do it as a team, or is this really a requirement by your market, by your user, by your customer altogether? If the answer is yes, please have at least some expertise in your company to focus on that one and get additional help if you say, I need further expertise for special niche topics. And the third thing is, do just a quick sanity check about what could be the worst things on a risk level that could be happening to your medical device. And as a consequence, what could be happening to your patient, to the doctor, to the user, whoever, or whatever could be the consequence there.
Yeah. And I think what you're talking about talent, and I think that's especially critical because a medical device is a project of projects. It's massive. There's many different components articulating, and each and every one of those could have cybersecurity implications, just like it could have different implications in terms of safety. And if you have an expert on hand that only comes once a month, then you might have worked 1 month for nothing. So I think you might want to develop this talent in-house and also make sure that the project managers involved in the medical device have some basic knowledge of cybersecurity. Maybe we don't have to get at least in the technical, but at least trigger a bit this cybersecurity piece, like, what could happen if kind of attitude that would be very beneficial for manufacturers.
Fully agree. So this should be really the basics that you really have somebody in your internal team or your extended team, because it's the same as with any other aspect in development, as you mentioned. Biocompatibility, serial transition from prototypes to mass manufacturing, for example, clinical evaluation. There are so many topics where you need to have at least a minimum level of expertise, and cybersecurity is getting into that direction altogether. But maybe from my side, in regards to security, what are the trends you are seeing where people are getting more awareness or where they're really lagging behind? Because from a technical standpoint, we have so many things altogether. We have wireless communication. We have updates that can be done over firmwares. We have smart devices that could be here. Do you see more risks altogether from hardware devices that could be attacked or solely software-related devices? What's the trend you're seeing?
I think.
What's your experience? In what direction does it go?
Yeah, I think there's both directions, just like you said before. There's people who are very pushing for cybersecurity. They're coming out with all these different things, and you're like, whoa, like you guys are doing good. I don't think you need me too much. And then you have the others that you have to push a bit more and convince. And you're right, if there's no one to push forward these cybersecurity thoughts in the companies, then likely nothing's going to get done too much, and we're going to have problems down the road. When you talk about the technicality of it, I think it's important to have technical talent. But the thing is, cybersecurity is not just one job anymore. I listen to other medical device podcasts, and I hear that there's a biocompatibility, there's the general person, and then you'll have the plastics person. And then within all these plastics, the guy will talk for 3 hours about his topic. You're like, how is that possible? So cybersecurity is the same thing. You need, first of all, somebody who's a generalist, who's going to understand, ask the right questions. And then when you get down to the details, you're going to need perhaps more specialized things, like a pen tester, like someone who knows how to do certain tests, perform certain tests, someone who can train employees on certain things. So you're right, it's complexifying. And oddly enough, we don't necessarily need a specialty in every situation. We just need to be able to have certain specialists at the right moments triggered by this generalist person who knows how to make the decisions.
I think this is really a great approach altogether to see the really puzzle of different niche expertises you additionally need. Because as you pointed out, saying cybersecurity is something one person can be an expert, be completely in. I'm a regulatory person, therefore I'm an expert in biocompatible clinical evaluation. I'm serious transitions. I mean, as you said, you can be a generalist in that, but you then need the experts altogether.
Yeah. I think it's a cohort of people working together. The question that I want to move on to, perhaps more MDR, because we said if you have 500 risks and you maybe have a top 20 and you have 480 that may also pose a threat, do you just have the intern take care of the 480 risks and write a lot of documentation or ChatGPT, what can you reasonably do when you know that something is not that important and yet you have to take care of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you really need to know is, are you in the right spectrum with the amount or the volume of risks altogether? Because let's be honest, if we take any medical device, if we are creative enough, even if it's a harmless medical device, we could be thinking about 4 billion plus risks altogether. Because there's an infinite combination of scenarios and problems that could be happening with a medical device, and that's not feasible. So the first thing, if you really have 500 risks and you are a low-risk medical device, then you might reconsider your general strategy and say, okay, maybe I could combine a few dozen of them, because at the end of the day, maybe I have different sources for these risks, but the consequences are always the same thing. So in that case, for example, you could reconsider and say, you know what, I have 25 different scenarios that are causing always the same harm or damage to the patient altogether. So why not combine that into one risk altogether and have one iteration there? But of course, if you're having more complex medical devices, let's talk about, I don't know, a CT machine, for example, X-ray machine or MRI machine, for example, or a surgical robot. I mean, these are highly complex medical devices. And there I could definitely say, yes, I wouldn't be surprised if you have several hundreds, if not even more risks altogether. So you now have this benchmarking. And if you say, yes, let's say maybe the 500 risks are justifiable because it's a rather high-risk medical device, it's fairly complex altogether, then you pointed out there are many different options how you could do that. The traditional way was always saying, okay, we need to have meeting after meeting, and we now would need to go at least once through each and every risk and say, is there any possibility to mitigate these risks? And the ISO 14971 standard, but also MDR is also agreeing on that, gives you 3 layers of risk mitigation, saying number 1 is safety by design, meaning I design the medical device in a way that the risk cannot even happen anymore. So, for example, if you say one of the risks is alternating current, because your medical device is plugged into the power socket, and it could kill somebody because, the electricity is flowing through the patient. One complete redesign could be that you're now using a battery-based medical device. So now you've killed and eliminated that risk. So that could be safety by design. The other one could be safety by functionality protection, meaning you still could have an issue, but there is some mechanical, software-related or hardware-related protection measurement that this risk is reduced or at least, eliminated or at least reduced altogether. So what could that mean? If you know that your medical device could be overheating, and there could be a problem that you're getting some 2nd or 3rd degree burns with the medical device, you could have an internal temperature sensor and a software related to that, or in that case, a firmware. And this is continuously tracking the temperature. And as soon as it's reaching a certain threshold, the whole system is shutting down, no matter what, due to safety reasons. So that would be the second level that I say I cannot really design it in a way that it won't happen, but at least I have some protective measures and functionality behind it. And the third level is safety by information, which means I use symbols, labels, text, tutorial videos, you name what, alarm systems or anything else to really inform the patient saying there is a problem or be cautious because there could be some trouble if you're not adhering to something. And this is also the priority. You should always try to start with, can I resolve that with design? If no, can I implement some functionality to reduce the risks and the problems? And only if that's also not working, let's try something by safety by information. And to answer your concrete question, you really then need to go for each and every risk and check these 3 options. Sometimes you can do more than one option. You could have 2 of these options, even 3 of these options, to try to reduce and mitigate the risk. And the tricky part is, even after mitigating the risk, let's say you have a high risk in the beginning and it's turning into a medium risk, we must not forget that the as low as possible principle tells me just because you have reduced it in the first iteration doesn't mean that you can automatically stop there. You reduce the risk, you reevaluate the risk, and now you check, could I still reduce the risk with some additional measures? And only if you say, no, I cannot come up with any additional things how I could reduce the risk without having this adversely affecting the benefit risk ratio, which is stated in the MDR, then you can stop at this one. So you could imagine that such a risk analysis could be several meetings or weeks, and sometimes even months, to go through each and every of these risks and do the risk analysis part on that one.
Yeah, you deliver a big package of information to your notified body when you submit it. You talked early on about you have to lower the risk, even if it is too expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a risk, it's quite small, and you're like, this is going to cost me hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of euros, dollars. What are your options here? Do you have to?
So yeah, that's a really good point. And I think now we have to differentiate between theory and how the real world works. So what I can tell you, if you would talk to an auditor from a notified body or even a competent authority and say, I'm not implementing this measure because you know what, it's too expensive, then I can tell you, you will get into trouble, because patient safety can never be argued with financial aspects. So this is a core principle, that saying it's too expensive or we don't want to do that because it costs us too many experts or something like that, that will get you into trouble. But there is another pragmatic way how to communicate that. As we mentioned before, if you have 500 risks, that will take a lot of time and a lot of effort. At the same time, we know every company and medical device manufacturer has only limited resources in money, in people, in time. So if we would have unlimited resources, we could implement a 100,000 euro risk mitigation activity for a small risk. But in real terms, what the manufacturer can say is, look, I have 500 risks. I've identified that 20 out of these 500 risks are really problematic because somebody could die. There could be some severe injuries. So I have limited resources. I will look at each of these risks. So I will not ignore the 480 other ones, but I will try to concentrate my energy on those risks and my resources on those risks that are most dangerous to the patient. So if you don't write, it's too expensive, but you say, we have this amount of resources, and my justification is that I'm not ignoring the other ones. I will try to use safety by information. I will think of easy approaches, how to lower the risk with, let's say, moderate or lower effort. And I will focus everything on these 20 important risks, and you can justify that. Then this is something I hope every auditor will understand. Yeah. So most of them will be understanding that. In theory, everybody should understand that. Because as you pointed out, otherwise I as an auditor could be saying, you know what, you ignored that one risks of those 500, and I know for 5 million euros you could resolve that risk, so do that. Then every manufacturer would be saying, you know what, then I'm stopping doing medical devices. You know what, then I'm going into another industry because I'm not interested anymore.
Yeah. And this way of thinking of justifying things I feel is very, very European. I think some of the folks are across the Atlantic are listening to us like, what is these guys talking about? Doesn't make sense, to stop. But it's just how we do it. We don't have much time left. I usually like to keep these episodes in 30 minutes. I'm going to choose which question. Okay, this one. Let's do it. You've applied your entrepreneur skills in both medtech and other markets. So you've been an entrepreneur in different things. What's a lesson from medtech that was surprisingly useful in other sectors?
That's a good one. I think if we talk from an entrepreneurial perspective, one thing I've really learned is that in the medical device industry, you have to be really sure that what you're developing or what you're about to be developing is really needed by the market. And this is something you can 100% extrapolate into each and every market. The only difference is in other markets, for example, if you're developing a consumer app or something like that, you think about something, you build it, you put it into the market, maybe in a few weeks. I mean, nowadays with AI, you can be really fast to deploy something onto the market, and you see the information if something is working out or not. But in the medical device industry, you have to have certified medical devices so that people really use it all together. So you might invest a year, 2 years, maybe even 5 years of development. And if you develop around the market or not for the consumer or the customer or the patient, you're doing that, you have wasted 5 years. Because just because you're having a CE mark or a medical device certification doesn't mean that your medical device will be successful. It's just the legal barrier and the regulatory barrier to enter the market. So I've heard many startups saying, and I was one of them many years before, saying, if it's CE mark, people will buy it because CE means the quality grade and the hospitals will use it and you will get reimbursement. Nobody cares about that, honestly, unfortunately. They care about, does it solve a problem? And if yes, is it worth the money the manufacturer is asking for? So what I've learned, because I've also had my fair share of wrong alignment, wrong development directions, and not properly listening to the customer or to the market, that's what I really learned. And I think if you learn that for the medical device industry, that no matter how fancy, shiny, and great your product or software is, if it's not needed by the market, it will simply die or not be used. You can use this exactly in each and every market, but even if it's not regulated, you will keep that in mind. No matter if it's a 2-week project or a 5-year project, you need to be sure that the market is there and people are really willing to pay money for that. So I would say that was one of my biggest learnings. No matter if my next venture would be in, I don't know, solar energy, I don't know, spacecraft development, video games or something like that. So it could be any other industry. MedTech really taught me you need to listen to the customer, because otherwise you're not only wasting a lot of time and money, but at the end of the day, you're having maybe a great product and everybody is saying, looks cool, but I'm not willing to. So that would be in summary I had a lot of learnings, but if you really, when you ask this question, that would be the one thing where I can definitely extrapolate that into each and every industry, no matter where I'm going to in the future.
Wonderful. What a great tip. Tibor, if people want to reach out to you, where can they go?
Yes, absolutely. So they can reach out via LinkedIn. So of course, we will share this episode and also promote this episode online on LinkedIn. So I think the best thing is if they want to reach out, have a question about the MDR, regulatory affairs, or for example, AI automation in larger companies, because they say they need some help with how to automate things or what are the for new trends about AI in this medical device sector, then I'm more than happy if they reach out on LinkedIn and just, send me a direct message on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. And we'll
Tobor
include
Zechmeister. So username.
Yeah, and we'll include the link of your LinkedIn inside of the description, so be sure to check it out below. Tibor, thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you so much, Mathieu, for having me, and see you next time.